Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Pitwell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 84, Make Your Sales Operations More Effective. And today we are joined by Bill Rice, CMO of ProPair, who is going to help us try and set out some effective tips and ideas for you. Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you all?
We're good, thank you. Well, I say we're good, actually. Just to give you the context, you can't see here, but it is horrific weather in England, not to be a cliche, but it's sort of that depressing grey that I think it's just making us all feel very sleepy. So we're going to inject some of your American spirit and try and pep us up, I think.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be helping you because I'm from Michigan, and I think we're sister weather here.
Yeah, it's not been great. But other than that, we're very good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. How's everything going today?
Wonderful. We're doing well. We're in the trenches with the market around B2C, all these different verticals. I like to say we're in the trenches with our clients and just trying to figure this thing out and make some revenue while everything's messy.
Amazing. Well, with that in mind, we'll dive in. Let's start with you. What did you do? I know I introduced you as the CMO of ProPair, but I think there's a few different areas you work at. So you could just give people listening a little bit of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm super passionate about B2C lead generation, and appreciative of you guys having me on here. I've been in and around this industry for 20 plus years. Both my background, my heritage is mortgage lending, so being operationally inside of those organizations, then inside of lead generators. So today, my primary focus, I own an agency which I've owned for just over 15 years. And that agency is focused on generating leads, consumer direct, sort of a turnkey marketing department for mortgage lenders and law firms. Mm-hmm. And then I also do fractional executive work. And so you mentioned ProPair. So ProPair is a artificial intelligence and machine learning decision platform that lead buyers are using to optimize their lead management, sales operations, leveraging that machine learning, and I'm the chief marketing officer there. So that's a big part of what I do as well.
Brilliant. It's one thing I've wondered just before we get into anything is what you count as lead management. I guess is it more because we've called Databall in the past a lead management system, but actually we're more of a lead distribution system because we don't operate on the sales side like the agents would interact with. It's just a system that would drive data into a CRM or a dialer. How do you see lead management?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting question because there's some history here. If you go back, so way back in the day when I started Kaleido, we actually started as a software company, and I had operated in really large call centers for mortgage and saw this problem of lead distribution and managing those leads. And so if you look at the Wikipedia page for lead management, I wrote the original concept for lead management, and I might have done it as a disservice.
I'm gonna have a look at it. Is that still live now?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's been obviously edited many times since, but the reason that I wrote it was because, and this is maybe the short answer to the question, when we went into the market, the only thing that people knew was CRM. And my argument always to clients when I was talking to them, because they were lead buyers, and this was a really new industry, 20 years ago, and people were just starting to buy pay per leads, on a performance basis. And I kept telling them, I was like, you don't need a CRM because you don't have a customer relationship. You need a lead management system to get you to the relationship. And so for me, lead management is really, once that lead is generated, that journey all the way to revenue, right? So lead management is probably a larger concept than it's become. Now it's become, hey, this is a sort of a mini CRM, or they're getting very sophisticated, of course. But yeah, I probably like you, I have a broader definition of lead management. So the moment that consumer shows intent, that life cycle is how you manage that lead, how you manage that consumer. And there are a lot of activities, and there are a lot of areas where that consumer can fall off. So trying to get from show of intent to revenue is, I think that's why I've always found it fascinating. It's a enormously complex system,
Yeah.
an ecosystem, right?
Yeah, exactly. So would you would you include like a dialer within that then, or not?
Yeah, I think the lead management system itself, there's been some softwares that have done some good things, and I think as APIs become more open and available, you'll have potentially this sort of Slack-like system where you hook in all of these features and functionality. Because originally, I mean, even the lead management that we built back in the day, generally all it did was intelligently, once you received the lead from wherever that source was, it would intelligently route it to a salesperson. And then ideally, and this is what I thought we did a little bit uniquely, we would then continue to tell that salesperson which of those leads had the highest probability of success, which is why I got involved in ProPair, because they finally had with AI and machine learning, had the technology that we were kind of just writing rules around. And a lot of people still do just write rules around to try to think about what's the sort of the best next lead or next activity to do. But I think all of those other things that now, and wow, we could go off on a super tangent. The consumer behavior is just changing, right? Because originally all you were trying to manage is trying to help the sales agent or the loan officer or whomever that salesperson is effectively make and land a phone call and have a conversation to take some form of application. And now today, consumers are just, it's almost foolish for a sales operation to believe that a consumer is going to, one, pick up the phone on an inbound call, even if they know who you are, and then sit still for 20 minutes and allow you to ask them a bunch of questions and take an application, right? Everything has moved towards scheduling. People like the convenience of a text or an email so they can control that scheduling, schedulers. So all of those systems, dialers included, because dialers are still effective. Like, when do you make those calls, making sure the salespeople don't miss calls and those sorts of things. All those components need to be snapped into whatever that baseline lead management system is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good segue, but into my next question, which is just simply to bring it back to the podcast title and sort of say to you, what are some of the ways you think to make sales ops more effective?
Yeah, so whenever I'm thinking of sales operations or making these more effective, I kind of break it down into sort of 4 areas, I guess. Lead distribution, I think, is critical. Like, what do you do with that lead when it comes into the organization? This is where lead management as a term gets a little bit cloudy. So I call it lead management, but it's sort of that initial outreach and sales cadence, which probably needs to leverage automation. And then there's a third component of what do you do with that lead when you think that it's dead? Because I always say a lead's never dead. We just stop talking to it, which is a bad thing, right? So it goes into this lead nurturing sort of activity. And then the fourth one, ideally, you would never have this if you've kind of set up everything properly, but invariably it happens. And that's, what do you do with aged leads, right? Things that are just sitting at the bottom of the barrel, or you've even acquired that. So that's the 4 components that I'm looking at. But the one thing that I always advocate is, whenever you build a system or you have a lead management system, despite however diligent you are, it probably doesn't actually behave the way you think it does or the way you designed it. So I'm a big advocate of bringing in ideally a third party, because I think you never do a good job of this yourself, but to truly audit what is happening in that system today, and then delineating what's working and what's not, right? So you can get started on sort of optimizing. And then as far as what you do, we could definitely drill into some of the common things that are happening in those 4 areas. But I think that always has to be the first step, is really getting a baseline as to what's really happening inside that system you've created.
Yeah. It's one of the things that we find is, and this probably happens within the lead distribution element that you've mentioned, once you dig into it, is, let's say you've got like your average conversion rate. So you've come out and you've got some reasonably high intent leads, and you're looking at the end of the month of a 18% conversion rate. And if that's hit ROI, what most companies will do is like, great, that's fine. Now we can just move on to the next month. And so either all those leads just get put into like a cycle where they rest it for a month and then might dial it again for a month later, which is like a very typical scenario. Or in a worst case scenario is they just drop it because they've hit ROI and it's now, let's just buy some more leads and we'll just keep, filling the leaky bucket. And as long as we hit ROI. But then if you look back at all these leads where, you've got a 82% non-conversion rate, there's probably a bunch of leads that you could never sell to anyway. As in, even if you could contact them, for some reason or other, they could never be your customer. The wrong person, like they haven't been verified or qualified properly or whatever. And then there's a bunch of people who, like most of us, are not in a buying stage at that moment. But in 3 months or 6 months, we potentially could be. And so all that money just gets wasted as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, it's kind of interesting. I guess there's 2 points to be made there. One, when I was operational inside of lenders, one of the things that I saw is some of that behavior is also driven by the individual sales agents themselves, right? So once they hit quota, so one thing that we always saw is once they hit quota, then they literally stopped doing sales and then went over, in the case of mortgage, they went over to the floor where all the processors were and then just beat the living crap out of them to get their loans to close, right? Because that's when they realized their commission. And so you really only worked, your sales operations only worked for like the first 15 days of the month. And then they were trying to squeeze, their commission check at the end. And so it's really hard to kind of control that behavior or overcome that. And then the second point, which before the call started, you had asked, some of the insights that we've seen using and applying artificial intelligence and machine learning into the sales operations. And one thing that I think is a really common, and this is just because this sort of technology wasn't available, so we use proxies, right? But one thing that's really common is we will buy, and you even said this, I think on one of your previous podcast, where you'll buy from multiple sources. That's a best practice for sure. And oftentimes the way that lines up is that you'll kind of have a premium lead provider. You might have an aggregator in there. You might do a little bit of direct mail. So you're going to have some dissimilar lead sources. And what you generally end up doing because of that ROI equation is you do look at the data and you see how that performs. And you say, hey, this top tier lead provider is my best lead. And the proxy you're using is the company, the brand, right? Or the channel. But what we've discovered is if you look inside of each of those channels, there is a very specific and predictable distribution in there. So you could buy co-reg leads, and there's going to be a small percentage of those co-reg leads that are the best lead you have coming into your organization, but you will necessarily say that's junk, right? Or if you're buying age leads, like you said, hey, because of that particular consumer's where they are in the process or where their intent has changed over time, there could be an age lead that's sitting there that's 6 months old, and right now they're the best lead in the organization. And where AI and machine learning helps is by looking at that historical data, they can start to be able to look at all of the leads, something that we can't scale, and start to bend those up or start to put those into ranks in a predictable fashion, predictable of close. And then what you can do is then you can start, instead of looking at all those channels holistically, you can actually look at your leads, on an individual basis and bend them up based on their probability of closing. And that's really the big effect that I think will become a core feature of lead management in general, because if you can do that, and if that is reliable, which we do see it's predictable, and we always run a control case where we don't do that, and then we run the actual machine learning algorithm, and we see consistently 20 to 30% lift in that conversion because you're doing a different set of sorting. So if the technology is available, it becomes at some point it'll become a baseline, but right now it's a huge competitive advantage when you're trying to figure out in your database, like what's probably going to close, and therefore what do I can make decisions based on how I want to handle those leads, instead of just saying, hey, lending, lead provider A is always the best. And that's not true, right? We know I generate leads for a living too, and not all of them are great, right? So, and a lot of that's driven by consumer. Some of that's driven by the way that we have to change marketing tactics, or we have to, as advertising shifts, then we have to make some shifts sometimes in order to make profitability and those sorts of things. So that's inherently going to create a distribution in those sources. So
I think it sort of feeds into this idea that like not all leads are equal as well. And by that, what we actually mean is like literally the lead isn't always equal. So it could be from your best performing channel, but there might be a lead that's just coming from your worst performing channel, which is actually better than the average of the best lead. And so if you can't necessarily react to that, you're always working to the channel rather than working to the lead effectively.
Totally. And I would say this, and this is kind of interesting because you can actually apply this and kind of take a look at historically. And so it's not theory anymore. Like I said, when we were early on trying to tackle this problem, we were writing rules and we were sort of guessing, and we were using big proxies into the data. But now with the ability to just process and analyze data, and now you add machine learning concepts to that, that are battle tested, this becomes fact, right? So it's almost silly not to incrementally use these kind of technologies to see that difference. And that's really the first step, is to see the difference. And then from there, you can make all kinds of clever decisions, right? And you can decide how you want to route them, because then the second step, we talked about this whole journey being really complex, and there's lots of rooms for things to fall away or you to impact yourself. So another common thing sort of related to that is also important to understand how this affects sales performance, right? So if you take your top tier, and I'm just going to kind of give a potential type of decision that you could make. If you take your top tier lead provider, or what you think is your top tier, best performing ROI, and you say, oh, well, I just want to give that to my top performing sales agent, right? And what is that based on? The units they produce, the dollars they produce. Who knows how that was produced, right? You probably have some indication, but if you shove all those in, one of the things that we've often found with the top performer is, one, the top performers are typically outliers. They typically are not entirely or carefully following your sales process, because they've already, the reason they're top producers, they've already got their own discipline. So they're probably an outlier, and they probably don't need your best lead, right? Or you can get more ROI out of the organization by using that talent to work on your middle tier leads, because we've actually seen that as well. Top performers often will have a better incremental impact on middle tier leads than you giving middle tier leads to middle tier salespeople, right? Because that's just there's no advantage there, right? So you can do really interesting things, because inside, and the last point on that again, some interesting things that we've seen inside of those sales agents themselves, you may batch them up. Hey, these are the best performing because they generate the most units, they generate the most revenue. There's also a distribution in there, right? There are certain leads they do better with than others, right? And so if you give them, their sweet spot, they do well. The other ones, especially in the top tiers, they just toss them on the floor because they don't need them, right? So anyway, there's all kinds of interesting thing in sales performance as well.
We did some machine learning with we did it with a few clients similar to what you're mentioning. So there were two sort of things that came out of it for us. So one is, and you guys must do this, you need a huge amount of enrichment on a lead. Like, you can't just use the information in the lead. There's not enough data to work like correct signals from. And number two is exactly what you just said, which is we were getting leads in, clarifying them as a score of like propensity to convert based on all the other information that we had of tens of thousands of sales in the past, over indexing or not against leads, trying to enrich them where possible, delivering them in, and then working out exactly what you just said, what agent should this go to. The problem we had is it's funny you mention it, exactly what you just said, which is every single lead was like sent to this person. It's always the same person. It's because they would, I think we ran it, there were like it was one company, one of the tests we ran that had 4 or 5 different call centers around the country, and we were trying to work out like where to deliver leads and whatever. And each of those call centers had like 1 or 2 people that were exactly like you said, were just outliers. For whatever reason, they were just markedly better at their job than any of the others. And so then it becomes, okay, well, you're gonna have to work out a different solution for the rest of them. It's a tough thing because it almost creates another problem in itself, doesn't it? Which is, well, how do we use it? Exactly what you said. How do you use this information to bring up the whole organization, not just a couple of individuals?
Sorry,
go ahead. I was just going to say, the problem comes back to this thing of what we found is in certain organizations, it's like being on a hamster wheel of sales. So they can't get off it enough that they won't stop giving their best agents the best data because they're paranoid of the potential repercussions. But then what happens is the worst just get worse and the best just get better. And you have to find a model to change that.
I think early on, and I would, you guys had a different experience than we're having, and I think that's probably data scientists talking to data scientists. But there is probably a common mistake that's made in there, and I'm sure we made it early on, and we've made some adjustments to that. So one thing I would say that's interesting is that we've found there is a consistent and a level amount of incremental performance enhancement by ranking or binning, however you want to characterize the leads. And we can do that predictive work within the confines of the lead information itself. We're just now, believe it or not, trying to test if we can get more, because we feel like we've started to understand where that ceiling is within the confines of the lead itself, right? Without any way enhancing or adding additional data. So now we're exploring potentially adding the data, and there's some nuance to that. I think probably what you experienced is something that we have had to kind of check with ourselves and the clients, and that is just given the initial results, our inclination, because of loss, the theory, the concept of loss aversion, right, is the natural inclination for the client is to say, okay, you've now told me the best leads, right? So all of the best leads need to go to the best agents. And theoretically, that would work if the assumption is that the best agent has availability to work all those, right? Which is not the real world. So we've had to introduce into, so now what we do is we essentially, we get control of the data. We, as a result of that, we push out this binning and ranking in real time of leads. And we provide those values, and we provide some other values as well, some values that are related to sales performance as well. We just provide the value. So we take all this complexity and we boil it down to a single value or a couple of values that we then append to the lead. And then from there, we work with the client themselves or the sales operation to say, okay, what do we want to do with this? And then the neat thing that we've done recently is we've actually created a simulator because we've done enough of this now that we can actually simulate the results so that you have you have some comfort, right? Because the worst thing you can do, and this is, I think, why a lot of people don't make a lot of changes in what they're doing, is because, again, they're loss averse, right? They don't want to introduce a change, because when you introduce a change, you could be really a lot better, or it could be a lot worse, right? Or somewhere in between. So, so that simulator has become really important. But you do have to then decide what is your objectives, right? So do you want to have equity amongst your agents so that all the agents do get leads to work on? And then you have to optimize, okay, how do I get the most out of the leads? Knowing that, one, they're not 100% available. So that best case scenario isn't even viable, right? So if I ran a simulation that said, I'm gonna give all my best leads to all my best agents and they will convert at this, yes, that's the best case. But again, they don't have the availability. They can't actually work that many leads, or they won't be able to work the leads as they come in, because they come in, in different, you don't know when you're going to get that best lead, right? You might get 10 best leads, and then you're going to get 40 horrible leads, right? So then you have to work with, and that becomes a more strategic sort of conversation, is what do you do with that data? How do you, and then you have to get into the distribution and the strategies and build out various strategies and then see how they perform and make those optimizations. So it is an ongoing process, but I think what you probably experienced is just there is additional work to be done after you have the values, right? The values are super helpful, but there's additional work to be done there.
Yeah, I think the mistake we had, or the opportunity we didn't have more, is working sales side, like you said. It was literally, we produced a score of probability to convert and best suited agent they would go to, but then we didn't, it was just like deliver it. It wasn't, oh, now we're going to be working in this element and doing X, Y, and Z. I think that might be where the difference is, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's always, and you've talked about a lot of this, that feedback loop. I mean, the more that we can collaboratively work with sales operation, even as just straight lead generators, the more that we could, and unfortunately, because of history, a lot of lead generators aren't willing to put the work in. They're like, hey, I'm handing you a lead, you give me whatever, and I'm out, right? But the more that we collaborate in there, because it is a complete journey, right? The better both parties will do with that, whether it's just getting feedback, data coming back, or sharing best practices. I mean, I love the example that you said. It's like, hey, you got you're a lead generator, you're handing off to 4 clients. And this is kind of what ProPair does as well, right? You're handing off to 4 clients, and you see this 4th client is like performing like way worse, right? You're feeding them all the same leads, it's all generated. So there's a sales operation issue there. Well, when you have something like ProPair in there, probably DataBowl is very similar. Once you have something in there, you can start to see those discrepancies and you can even up best practices. And then the question becomes like, are you willing to kind of take the medicine, right, and understand the best practices and implement? And that's why I like to get, like, consultants always do better, so there's, and I'm sure you've talked to these guys.
You can't be blamed as a consultant, right?
Well, I think that's the key, right? Internally, you have too much at stake to say what needs to be said sometimes, or to do what needs to be, or even just take, and so sometimes by putting in somebody like an SDP Solutions or something like that has credibility, they come in, they say this is best practices, they're working with other clients. I mean, one thing that is consistent, I think, with lead buyers is they want to be competitive. So I never walk into a conference or talk to a lead buyer when they don't say, like, what are other people doing, right? But sometimes it takes a consultant for the rest of the organization to support some of those best practices, not even just the secret tricks. It's just core best practices. So
one thing I'm curious about is, as you can imagine, I've spoken to lots of people in marketing over the years, and when it comes to discussing machine learning, there's always a kind of idea that they're interested in it, but there's almost this like reservation, or perhaps they're sort of saying, yeah, one day, but not now, maybe tomorrow, that's something we think about. And this might just be because we've probably discussed this more maybe 3 or 4 years ago than we are doing now. But do you find that there's still that resistance, or do you think that the tide's turning and people are actually using this more and more open to it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really common objections, right? I think first and foremost, and this seems counterintuitive, it was to me when I first got involved with ProPair, is people almost have an ego factor with their data. And so the first thing we hear is, my data's messy, or like, it's not ready, or, I don't have it, I don't have control. But it is the thing usually that's keeping that person up at night, because they know, especially with newer systems, these systems are pumping out so much data, right? They're tracking every little thing, every phone call, every text message. There's so much data being spit out of or available with these systems that usually that sales operation leader or that marketing leader knows that what they want to know is in there, right? Is in that data, but they're intimidated that and again, it's almost an ego thing, and we try to get through this is like, it's not really as messy as you think. And the people that work on this data, people like DataBowl, people like ProPair, like they have people that are experts at like wrangling data and getting it under control and getting it into a place. And then the other, so that's the first objection, is just, hey, it's just too messy. Don't have control over it. But it is the thing that's keeping them up at night, because they know when their CEO goes like, hey, we bought all these systems, they're kicking out all this stuff, you should know how to, look at the data and do something better. And, or they're just kicking out hundreds of reports. And then this poor marketing executive or sales operation is trying to go through reports and be a data scientist, right? So that, I think that's the first thing that people get hung up on. And then the second thing is, because we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning and probably some things they read, they think they need to be the expert in these systems. And so their first inclination is that the integration part of this, the implementation, is going to be horribly complex. And I don't have the engineers to do that. But the nice thing now versus maybe when this has been tried in the past is a lot of AI and machine learning is quickly being productized, so that it is literally, hey, we've got some models and we've got some base cases. We know how to take the data in, wrangle it into an acceptable way, and then we can quickly produce an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm that can use that data effectively. And then all you really have to work with, and this is the case with ProPair, is all you really have to work with is, I'm going to give you, a rank value, or a mixed value, or, we've got 4 basic values we're going to give you 4 numbers, and then you work with your system the way you do, and you use those to your advantage to do more sophisticated routing, more sophisticated distribution, more sophisticated performance metrics around lead sources and those sorts of things. So the productization of that is another hangup. They think they have to understand it, instead of just understanding that we're going to take you through it. We're going to show you how it works. We're going to help you to understand machine learning better, what it can do, what it can't do. But ultimately, it's been productized. So all you have to do is, it's like appending any other value. If you want to append new phone numbers, ProPair doesn't do anything terribly different on a technical implementation factor. It's just, you're going to feed it. We're literally going to look at that feed as that lead comes in. We're going to give it a value, and then we're going to pass it. We're going to append it, and it's going to go through, and then we'll work with you to do intelligent things with that. But that's all it's doing, right? It's been productized. So those are the 2 big factors that usually hang people up, is my data's a mess, and like, oh, this is going to be a headache to implement.
Do you know what? It's really refreshing to hear someone talk about it in the way you are. And I wonder if the US in some ways is like a bit ahead of the UK, because as Daniel mentioned, I spoke about, we developed this machine learning product. I can't even remember how long ago, but we had some real trouble getting anyone, literally anyone, convinced to be able to, we were trying to give it away for free at one point. It was like, can you just test this thing? And exactly what you said, all we're going to do is kick a score out. And I mean, one of the biggest challenges we had is, I'm not giving you any of the results back. I was like, we can't do anything without knowing, we were like, we want a year's worth of sales that you've made. Send it all back. If you've used like our system delivering it, if not, we need all the leads that led to those sales as well. So we're talking about a lot of data, and they could easily access it. There was this absolute fear that I don't know why, but we really, really, really struggled to the point of getting anyone. I mean, and I'd speak to dialer managers and stuff, guys that were allocating data out to people that come in. And the conversation I'd have would be like, no, we're not doing that. And I'd be like, why? Like, if we can improve just by 2% and just, we'll do it for free. They'd be like, no, you don't know this data or my agents like I do. And I was like, yeah, I'm not saying I do. I'm just saying hidden within this data, there could be something that's just going to be like, like a little signal that's going to show to you, and then you'll, be able to do it. And honestly, it's maybe it's to do with the way we were describing it. I don't know, but I can't tell you. it just got to the point where what Daniel said, we actually just stopped talking about it. We were like, you know what, we just can't get anyone, like, for love nor money, to be interested in this thing. It sounds like you guys have been far more successful in doing that.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you. I think lead buyers in particular, and even lead generators to some degree, one, I would state that it's almost crazy that both of our industries are so far behind everything else. Like, one of the things we always introduce when we start talking to somebody is like, what we're talking about today, we are like so far behind the times. You are surrounded by this, right? You turn on your TV and you go to Netflix, it tells you, like, it's using AI and machine learning to tell you what your preferences are and give you discoverability. When you talk to your phone, AI and machine learning is making sure that your phone understands. Like, this technology is all, I mean, Uber's using it to make sure that you get connected to somebody efficiently, even though there may be a market deficit, right? So this is all around us. Lead generation, even though we have kind of the best data for this, we're like super far behind on that. So that is flabbergasting, but I think some of that is just, and this is the shift that I think has happened, is kind of the trust in the industry, because, and I think you kind of mentioned this, back in the day, a lead generator asking a lead buyer for data regarding current statuses of the leads, they're like, oh, you're just going to increase the cost of my leads, right? Because you're going to find out they're doing well, right? And you're going to say, oh, I should get more. And I think we're starting to get over that. I think we're starting to get more comfortable with data inside of I think marketing is a little bit ahead of being comfortable with data than sales operations, because sales operations is just kind of sales reports, right? And I think we're starting to get more advanced. And then, the other thing that has really trended differently is in this, especially in the mortgage industry, in this point in time, like, every loan is a job, right? And so all of a sudden the sales operations are like, okay, we got to figure this out. Like, if there's a way, we've got to figure it out, because we're in a moment now where there are no like slam dunks coming through leads, right? The consumer's tentative, everybody's on the sidelines, but there's still, in the US, there's still projected $2.5 trillion in mortgages getting ready to be made, but, like, are you getting your part, right? And I think the other thing, this is an example, and this is a US based example, but the other thing that bears in mind, and it's a different situation and cycle, but in 2007, 2008, so when I was operational, inside of a lender, I was working with Quicken Loans, right? Now Rocket. Well, if you look at history, like, what should you be doing at this moment? When that happened, they made massive continued investments in technology, and they went from the number 12 lender in the US to the number 1 in the middle of the financial disaster. So that's the other opportunity right now. The people that are leaning into technology and innovation and just forget buying ProPair or anything like that, just getting control of your data and using it intelligently is going to take market share, right? So
yeah, I agree. I was working for a company called DMRI, which is a lead generator at the time in 2008 as well. I remember there would be two pieces of advice that I'd give anyone when I would just remember back. So one is, financial services did really well, apart from the companies that had poor credit limits to buy leads anyway, and they did really badly and all went bust, from what I remember.
Yep.
It was a really like stark difference between, I guess, the importance of building a brand, because the ones that they just survived, they could ride it out, like you said, probably made investments, doubled down in the strength of their market share and whatever else, and then we had all these sort of smaller companies. I remember at the time, there would be like invoices not being paid and companies going into administration and stuff left, right, and center. I don't know whether that'll happen this time. I just remember it as a really stark thing at the time, thinking, do you know what? It's only big companies outside of the ones that are already thinking of investing in a brand that seems to do well here.
Right.
I don't know if that's what you found as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, unquestionably. I mean, and these things reconstitute too. I mean, just I'm very active on LinkedIn, and you just look through some of the folks that are in the industry and look at the lineage, right? These they reconstitute, right? And so, and the smarter people, keep moving up, and they take that, the things that they've learned and the things that they wanted to do at other companies, and they've they've built up. So there is a loss factor in there, but there's a lot of talent that just reconstitutes into something stronger and better, and accelerates or gets acquired, into there are clients. We have the same sort of breakdown in clients, particularly with the agency, right? You see some that they were great in refi when everybody was beating down their door, right? But then, as Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing swim trunks, right? So, and that's essentially what's happening at the moment, and the people that are stronger, more competent, and have probably leaned into data, right, and doing something intelligent with it. Those are the people that are getting stronger and stronger, because that's what you have to do right now. Just buying more leads isn't going to solve problems, and you can't just hire more loan officers, right? In a refi boom, that's the strategy, right? You just hire as many loan officers as you possibly can. You don't really care, other than they're a live body, and you buy as much leads as you can. And so in this market, those two strategies don't work. So what do? You have to dig in there and figure out what leads are going to actually convert, and what salespeople are most likely to convert them, and that's a math problem.
Yeah, 100%.
Bill, I'm going to put you on the spot here, so apologies in advance. But when we have guests on, we always like to sort of end the podcast by asking them for some tips or some advice that people listening can take home with them and maybe sort of try things out. So I'm going to do that, but specifically, I want to come back to something you sort of hinted at the start, and you were saying that people's behaviours are different these days. Like the customers are actually acting differently, expecting things. You have to sort of adapt in that sense to how you're approaching your sales. So with that in mind, have you got some ideas for people listening for a sales cadence that can try something, give it a go, and take away with them today?
Yeah, I wrote a post yesterday, just briefly, as we often do on LinkedIn, I think out of a bit of frustration, just watching some clients and the way they're doing their sales operation. So the number one thing that I would tell all sales operations to start doing tomorrow is stop thinking about themselves as a call center, and start thinking about themselves as a contact center. So to say it the most aggressive way you can, I think the phone call is dead, right? And so when you get a new lead, we have shaped and built all of our systems to do the speed to lead being the phone call, how fast you can make that first phone call. And I think that's completely irrelevant. I think showing the consumer that you're responsive, and you're immediately ready to assist them, is better served by making, and you can do this with technology instantly and personally, right? I think when you talk about inbound leads, age leads, slightly different sort of cadence, but for an inbound lead, the first thing that if I were writing the script, would be for that lead to come in, to be already, use something intelligently so that you get it to an active, available sales agent, and you trigger sub-second a text message that says something like, which is probably true, that, hey, I'm on another call with a client, but I'm going to give you a call in the next 20 minutes, or tell me if there's a better time. And that's a text message. And then the next thing you do is you actually honor that, right? Within 20 minutes, you make that call, right? Unless they've given you a better time. A high percentage of those people will give you a better time. They'll say, hey, no, call me at 6 tonight, or give me or you should give them a scheduling link, and they'll schedule an appointment. And then the last thing that you do, probably a couple times, in that sequence, is the third step, is email them. Hey, this is all my contact information. This is what we're going to do next. Foreshadow the process. Give them all your contact information, and give them the scheduling link. And so I think we should start to reshape our sales playbook to be a contact center. And we should lead with the consumer's preference today, right? I just recently bought a new truck, did the whole thing over text message, never talked to the actual sales agent on a phone call, right? Did the whole thing. And it was convenient, right? I could pass him pictures, I could pass him links of things I was looking at. He could actually send me a link so that I could, configure everything. And he sent me, the deal, and we did the whole thing over text message, right? So I think consumer preferences have changed. A phone call, your phone ringing, is an irritant. And so we still inherently, and you should think about yourself sometimes. I don't know, sales agents will act one way and then they'll behave differently in their job, right? So you probably don't answer your phone, even if you're a sales agent. You probably don't terribly enjoy a lot of phone calls unless it's family or friends or that sort of thing. And that's an irritant. But a text message coming in, or even, I'm a big fan of these. Obviously, everybody's got to figure out their compliance and legal things, but voicemail drops, right? Again, voicemail shows up. I handle voicemails the same way I do text messages today, right? I don't listen to a voicemail. I read it, right? And so voicemail drops are great, right? Because when you call, they're all going to be voicemails anyway. So why not just drop the message and give them that? They get to hear if they do listen to you, they'll get to hear your voice. And so I definitely think there's a role for phone calls, but I think the phone call now is a scheduled appointment. So you should be going after appointments. So anyway, that's something that I think everybody should change instantly.
I think that's a really good point, and yeah, 100% right. I don't actually ever listen to any voicemail. I haven't done for about 10 years, but if it comes through as a text, I would do. But the other thing is I don't answer any, and this is much to my detriment in some cases, actually, because I've missed some seriously important calls as a result, but I don't answer any phone number that I don't recognize. If I just don't answer it, because I'm that used to just getting plagued with crap, basically. I just can't be bothered listening to any of it. What I find interesting is, would you, is either that or put the appointment on like a form?
Yep.
So, just to give you like a real quick example, and it's not in B2C, but we do have clients that will implement calendars on. But on like the Dateable form page where we go in, someone says, I want a demo of Dateable. We just used to have it where you fill it in because we were just like conditioned to like, this thing of reduce friction. But then it was like, well, hold on. 50% of the people you then ring at the moment the demo comes in, because we're like, speed to lead, let's get them on the phone, don't answer the phone anyway. And I think, well, they're like me, they're probably like, don't recognize the number, they're not going to answer it. So we just put it as a calendar appointment, book a good time, whatever. And I would say we have 100% like people show up now.
Yeah.
It's like an absolute massive difference. I was just telling this to someone, another technology provider the other day. I was like, it's night and day between the amount of people we can contact now. And so the guys who put it on their forms, and obviously it's a big thing with intent, right? If you're buying a co-reg lead, it's pretty difficult to book a time. But if you've got a Solus form, Phil, for a reasonably, you're going to have a consultation. It's not something, you might be able to do on text, but you might want to speak to someone. Right. Booking a time, or I guess doing it via the text where you go speed to lead instantly. The only problem with booking a time is it becomes a bit weird with the sales team, doesn't it? Like the availability and stuff.
Yeah, that's where we've always run. I mean, and I think schedulers are getting better and smarter, and schedulers are trying to figure out the whole concept of teams and contact centers and those. So I think it'll get there, but that's what we've run into. So one of the things when we're generating leads, one thing we stopped calling them thank you pages, and we call them next step pages, because thank you kind of closes off. And we often do that with a thank you. We close off the sales cycle with the consumer. We're like, hey, thank you. And they kind of like mentally, for whatever reason, think, okay, all of a sudden I'm going to, get my insurance policy, and I don't need to be responsive or whatever. But so turning control over to the consumer at that point and saying, hey, these are the next things that we need to do. And if you're ready to do those right now, go ahead and give us a call. We generate a ton of inbound calls, which everybody loves. The thing that we've wrestled with, and I do think the scheduled appointment would be even more productive, and I think this is what sales operations need to work on, is the technology to truly be able to handle that problem, right? So the schedulers are getting better, but it is hard to go into a single link and then somehow get distributed and then somehow find out the availability of the agents, for the future. So I think there's some technology that needs to be worked on there, but I absolutely agree. Like
Yeah.
even just professionally interacting via email, like I always opt, and we've done some testing on this too, by the way. I always opt for the link, but even in your B2C, if you put in your email, and this is another little tip that I advocate in copywriting, the line is always, tell me the best time for me to contact you, or the most convenient time, or if it's easier, just use this link and grab a time. Everyone uses the link. No one, I think salespeople are often like, oh, somebody's going to ask me to call them at 7 o'clock at night, and I don't want to interrupt my family time. No one takes that option, right? No one gives you an unreasonable time as an email reply. They don't. They click the link and they schedule a convenient time, and the consumer feels like they're in control, but you have total control over your availability, right? You just have your sales blocks, right? So that's another tip too, is just, the scheduling link. You're right on. That's going to be the future for sure.
You can see where the issue is, because if it's like, you'd have to wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes for the agent you want it to go to, and it's like what they're going to do in that time, or they're not available and it's suddenly the new guy who has no idea that what he's doing, and you're like, no, he can't call. But I think one of the problems as well is and I don't know, I think this might have been more of a UK problem potentially than US. I think you had this in the past, but we've done a podcast about this actually, is the fact that in B2C, we need to start seeing agents a bit more like they are in B2B, as in professional. They can be left to their own decisions. You train them to make the right decisions. Don't just treat them like a battery farm, where it's like they sit on a dialer and just get call, because that's the only way they can then start to make these decisions and send the right emails, respond with the right text, start to really progress like conversations themselves. And it's to do with the volume of agents and the amount they get remunerated and the perception. There's call centers, I mean, in the city we're in the UK, in Sheffield, where they have 100% churn rate every month.
Oh yeah.
So they'll have, they have 150 salespeople all dialing like really low intent list data, whatever. And every month, half of the entire call center leaves. They get the pay packet, leave. They have to hire another load. Imagine the costs involved in all of that.
Oh yeah.
The training all gone. And really it's to do with the intent of the leads and the quality of the leads. And it's to do with they're seeing the sales side as like, well, it's funny really, because they're not seeing that as important, and they're not seeing the marketing and lead generation important either. Basically just cost cutting absolutely everywhere, rather than like, lower volume, higher quality.
No, I think, and this is where I think, I think these things like machine learning will start to happen, because I think and we did the same thing, when I was running sales operations, we would turn 45% of our sales force every quarter, right? And a lot of that, looking back on it now, and even looking at some of the clients today, is because we don't use some sophisticated data and ranking and distribution and that sort of things. What invariably happens is you hire some top producers, or somehow the top producers figure out how to become top producers, right, of their own volition. They become outliers because they've got their own discipline, they've got their own thing that's worked, right, and they get all the best, right, what we talked about earlier, right, and all these new folks, maybe we give them training, maybe we tell them to read some books, that sort of things, but then we just give them crap. We just feed them crap, and then we expect somehow they're going to bloom without any fertile ground, right? And if we can use some of these more things like machine learning that gives us true understanding of not only the quality of the leads, but also the availability of our sales force, and does some equitable distribution. And we've seen some really interesting examples of this with our clients at ProPair, is then you can watch these folks get better. You're mean. So what normally happens, and we've got a slide that kind of shows this, normally what happens is you've got outliers on the top performing side, you got outliers on the bottom, and you're probably not going to do much better with them, with any of the technologies. There's something in there that's special, or these people just don't have the capacity to be better. But that mean just moves, right? It all gets better because it gets slightly better. They get more at bats. They get slightly better at bats. And so sometimes just the lead itself, helps them, right? Nothing they did, but the lead was ready to go. So, I mean, if you're really, you're ready to buy a home, or you need insurance, right? Like, I just bought a truck. I need auto insurance right now. Like, the worst insurance sales agent will probably still get my policy, right? Because I need it, right? So that's where being able to distribute those leads more intelligently, knowing exactly what they are, potentially can help you, I think, is better training than some of the, sitting through PowerPoint slides and teaching it. That's the other thing too. It's kind of a side rant for me, but sales training is all focused on the conversation, linguistics and the tricks of the voice and tone, and, how I use, Jedi mind tricks to get them to buy. But man, so much of the sales process is way before you get somebody on a call, and then no one likes to be played with like that, right? So it's like, but that's, every sales book out there is how to use some, clever turn of the phrase to get me to
just have good marketing. That'll help a bit. But
yeah, right. I mean, there's a lot of marketing techniques that need to be inside the sales process, right? So we're still marketing to those consumers, even though they're in the sales process, right?
Yeah, great.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I think it's been super useful for people listening, and very interesting to chat to you and to share some ideas. It's been a great guest, so thank you so much for that.
Yeah,
thanks.
I love this stuff. I love watching you guys. So this is just, I don't know. It's a weird kind of fun for me, I guess. Not everybody. But
you're the first person that's ever said that. So we'll take it.
That was episode 8 of Make Your Sales Operations More Effective.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.